Yeah, it's nice for a change. It's really nice. I like it like this.
Yeah, had to run a fan today in my little nook here because it gets stuffy. There's a window right beside me and no circulation, so quite hot already. We'll just wait a couple more minutes and see if other folks are going to be joining. Oh, good. Anders, hello.
Hello, Jason.
Hi, nice to see you. We're just waiting a couple more minutes for other folks to join in. We'll get going in just a
Perfect.
sec.
I'm gonna unmute myself because I'm gonna have to eat my lunch now.
No worries, no worries. Hey, Raymond. Hey. Yeah, well, maybe we'll get started. We have just a couple minutes of intro and other folks can join if they're running a little bit late. So Anna, why don't you kick us off?
All right, well, officially, good afternoon, everybody. Bienvenue. On behalf of the Fourth Space team and the 17 Rooms exercise organizers, as we get settled into this virtual space, we'd like to acknowledge that Concordia University is located on unceded Indigenous lands in Tiohtià:ke, Montreal. We recognize and are grateful to the Kanien'kehá:ka Nation for their care for these lands and waters and their teachings about the earth and our relations. Tiohtià:ke, Montreal has been a gathering place for many First Nations for millennia, and today is home to diverse population of Indigenous and other peoples, and recognizing and respecting the presence and ongoing connections of these historical and contemporary communities is an important step towards building trust and creating or renewing relationships. So today you are all here to consider SDG 12, responsible production and consumption. And we thank you so very much for taking the time to participate, especially on such a beautiful Friday afternoon. We are running the 17 Rooms exercise via Fourth Space, although virtually, as part of our mission to create engagement around the projects, initiatives, commitments, and dialogues in development across the university. So it really has been our pleasure to welcome participants in and audience members as well each week, as well as the people who made this exchange happen, notably Jason Enns and Monica Mulrenan, who will be today's facilitators, as well as Concordia knowledge brokers Prem Suryakumar and David Ward, who have been part of the development process of these exercises from the very start. So Jason and Monica will be taking you through a number of exercises and will encourage your active participation by joining in with a raised hand. Those of you who are more comfortable on the chat, we will also encourage your reflections there, and we'll be keeping all of those for safekeeping. So I am going to pass the floor now to our friend in ED Strategic Initiatives in the Office of the Provost, Jason Enns. Over to you, Jason.
Thanks, Anna. Hi, everyone. I think I know everybody here, but just a brief introduction. I work on various strategic initiatives in the Provost's office, including helping to lead our consideration as an institution about how we want to engage with the UN Sustainable Development Goals. And this is part of that process. Just a brief kind of introduction for my own motivation and interest in the SDGs, and then I'll hand over to Monica to do a similar introduction, and then we'll share with you what the agenda for today looks like and get started on our conversation. So my own interest in the SDGs stems from my PhD work, which focused on how universities enact their commitments to quote unquote civic engagement. And one of the things that I concluded is, as I pursued that line of inquiry, is that that often universities lacked kind of common frameworks and common objectives as they tried to work with governments and communities to achieve certain goals. And I think this SDG framework really provides an interesting and compelling kind of framework that universities can use with other kinds of partners to have a shared orientation and shared set of objectives. So that's really where my interest stems from. And then layered on top of that, along with a lot of you, I'm sure, just have a really grave concern about the sustainability and livability of our planet going forward because of climate change, and just feel a sense of urgency around doing all that we can as an institution, in addition to what we're all doing personally, to really optimize, heighten, and do as much as possible to really help to achieve more sustainable futures for ourselves and our progeny. So that's kind of my little bit of my background, and I'll hand over to Monica to do the same.
Yeah, hi everyone. Thanks for joining us today. I'm Monica Mulrennan, currently serving as Associate Vice President, responsible for research development and outreach. I'm also a professor in the Department of Geography, Planning and Environment. In terms of research, I work with Indigenous coastal communities. I've worked for almost 30 years with James Bay Cree of Iwichti, Northern Quebec, and also Torres Strait Islanders in Northern Australia. I work on a range of environmental stewardship and conservation strategies, those that support the recognition of Indigenous authority and jurisdiction over their lands and waters and lives. So my research isn't directly tied to SDG 12, but obviously, working with Indigenous communities, very familiar with the attention to harvesting and many other aspects of their lives where you take only what you need. So my interest in the SDG framework is really motivated by a concern about the state of our world and the need to redefine our relationship to it and to one another. I see the SDGs as a list of good intentions, starting points for a dialogue, which is what we're here for today, and really focused on how we might fashion an improved world of social and environmental justice and responsibility. As Anna reminded us in the territorial acknowledgement, even though we don't have, unfortunately, we don't have Indigenous colleagues here with us, but I do think as treaty partners and as settlers, there's an opportunity here to think about how the SDG framework can help us advance our commitment to reconciliation. So back to you, Jason.
Great. So we'll just ask folks around the room here, so to speak, to give a brief introduction of yourself. So maybe just your name, your role at Concordia, and just a sentence or two about what's the interest in the subject to you, or the SDGs to you, just to give us a little flavor of your interests and background. So I'll start with Jordan, who's first on my screen.
Hi, my name is Jordan Labelle. I'm from the Department of Marketing. I've been weaving sustainability into my syllabi, both undergrad and MBA courses for a while now. I grew up on a farm. I used to be a chef, so any matters around sustainability is close to my heart. I personally feel that we are asking a lot of consumers to educate themselves, to make the right choices, to do the right thing. And I'd love to find ways to make that easier somehow for people when it comes to sustainability.
Great, thanks, Jordan. Faysal?
Hi, yeah, my name is Faysal. I have two roles that I'm kind of bringing to the table. Not sure which one comes first, but I've been a student since before I was working at Concordia, so I'll talk about that first. I studied engineering. I started with mechanical back in the day, and then I went into civil engineering, kind of spurred by my interest in the environment. And so I studied civil and environmental engineering. It's a master's like more than 10 years ago here at Concordia. And through that, I got really interested in composting technologies and how we treat food waste, and the idea of managing our problems versus designing solutions. I was inspired by the book Cradle to Cradle. And I got sucked into the world of sustainable advocacy at Concordia. I met people like Ariane Weeks, who I worked with for a long time on projects here at Concordia, trying to do better in terms of not just thinking about it, but doing better on campus. And so I've been involved as a professional as well, working as the environmental specialist through environmental health and safety, and then facilities management, helping to implement zero waste projects here on campus and our zero waste program. And now I'm back to school as a PhD student, studying how circular economy can be accelerated adoption of these kinds of practices through data-driven technologies. I'm in the Indie program, so I look at it from not only a technical lens as an engineer, but also thinking in terms of marketing and in terms of policy as well. So I think a multidisciplinary approach is very important in this problem. I also think economics is obviously super key, and I hope that is part of the discussion today.
Great, thanks, Faysal. Sorry for the mispronunciation. I'll get it. Let's see, Alex.
Hey, I'm Alex Pache. I'm a PhD student in the Geography, Planning, and Environment department, and I study environmental change using tree rings. So I'm not directly connected to this, but in my other activities outside my research, some things that I do is I've with the Climate Emergency Committee here at Concordia, we developed a game show presentation where we went to classrooms, high school, CEGEP, and university all over Quebec, and presented about the climate crisis. And a big aspect of that was there was reducing waste and consumption aspects to the research there. And then I'm also doing an internship where I'm training with a couple other students. I'm training an AI chatbot about climate change, so that basically we just have to feed it questions and answers, so that when people want to chat with it, it could tell them whatever they want about climate change. And there as well, there's waste and consumption aspects to the research there. So that's where any sort of knowledge is coming from me. And I'm also a junior associate at the Loyola Sustainability Research Center here as well.
Great, thanks for the intro, Alex. Glad to have you here. Carmela.
Hi, everybody. My name is Carmela Cucuzella. I am from the Design and Computation Arts Department. I also have a university research chair in integrated design and sustainability for the built environment, which means that I try to look at questions of the built environment from this kind of a systemic approach. And I'm also co-director of the Next Generation Cities Institute. The reason, I've been trying to come to some of these sessions quite a lot, but finally I came to one. So I'm glad that I'm here at this one. And this one actually intrigues me because I've always, for me, the fine line between production and consumption is, well, in fact, there's no line between production and consumption, and that one leads right into the other. And so I'm really trying to understand how that relationship can take place. A little bit what Jordan said about how to make it easier for the consumer, but it can't start at the consumer. It has to start far beyond that, so.
Great, thanks, Carmela. Anders.
Yes, so my name is Anders, and I am a postdoc I used to be at JMSB, but now I'm at the Geography department. I think I'm bringing maybe two perspectives to this chat, this conversation. The first being that I'm a specialist in environmental life cycle assessment, which is a way of quantifying embedded impacts in the things that are produced or consumed. So it's also a way of linking quantitatively consumption and production activities. The other thing I think I'm bringing is I'm currently studying corporate science-based targets, which is a relatively new phenomenon where companies, they are setting greenhouse gas emission reduction targets that are allegedly aligned with the goal of the Paris Agreement to limit global warming to 1.5 degrees. And so there's a whole translation going on between this global goal and the individual organization. And so it's basically a similar thing that I think needs to happen with SDGs, because what I see a lot is that organizations, whether it be universities or companies or cities, they will look at the things they're already doing, and they will say, oh, this relates to SDG 7, this relates to SDG 12, this is 30. Just like labeling things with an SDG symbol, but it doesn't really change anything. So I think we need to ask ourselves, what is the responsibility of individual institutions in doing enough so that we can meet these targets within the SDGs globally? So that's the perspective I'm bringing.
Yeah, that's what these conversations are really all about, Anders, because you're right that like we all came into this exercise saying we know that labeling is the prevalent practice, and we want to try to go further than that. Thanks, Aryan.
Hi, my name is Ariane Weeks. I am the Material and Tool Literacy Coordinator at the Center for Creative Reuse here at Concordia. I've been involved there. I co-founded it with Anna Timbodos back in 2017, so it's been around for 5 years now. And in that role, I essentially am a curator of almost any material that's on its way to being thrown out at Concordia, and trying to either find it a new home if it has potential still at the university, or bring it to our center and allow it to be accessible to the wider community to take away for free. I've been involved in sustainability at Concordia since 2006, so over 15 years. First as a non-student, but part of a student fee levy group, Sustainable Concordia. I did a lot of their design and web work early on. Worked with Faysal back in those days, organizing events and different things like that on campus. I'm really interested to go deeper into the conversations about how are we changing our purchasing practices at Concordia to lessen our impact. We still buy computers with styrofoam in them, and we're one of the few provinces in Canada or places in North America that doesn't currently recycle styrofoam on a large scale. So I want to delve into that. How are we changing our purchasing habits? Kind of what Jordan was talking about too. How do we facilitate the process, make it easier for Concordians to do things like that? So glad to be here.
Great, thanks, Raymond. And last but not least, Raymond.
Hello, thank you. Raymond Paquin. I'm a professor of management in Molson School of Business, and I've had the pleasure of connecting with most of you all, and for the rest of you, it's good to meet you. I'm glad we're having these conversations. My own research, and I think Ariane, it was great that you that you were in front of me. Basically, my research studies what Ariane has created with sucker here on campus. Only I've been looking at it in terms of regional ecosystems and at a nation state level, and the development of the underlying networks that form as industries engage in managing and reusing their byproducts for resource reduction and product and service redesign. So thank you.
Super amazing group we have here today, and really looking forward to the conversation. Monica is going to give us a walkthrough of the agenda, and then we'll dive in.
Yeah, so for these discussions, we've really aimed to bring together faculty, staff, and students for initial discussions on the SDG framework. And even though we're a small group, it's interesting the multiple hats that some of you wear. So, we really taken a whole of the organization effort approach to the 17 rooms. Some universities have focused only on the researchers, but we see the real value of including students, staff, and the whole of the organization. So we try to have a diverse range of people, perspectives, and experiences here, at the same time as keeping it small enough to have a really fulsome discussion. And for this stage, we've also opted to stay internal. So we see these conversations as a good starting point, and hopefully in the conversation we'll identify opportunities to extend, particularly to outside additional perspectives, but initially just keeping it internal. So in terms of the agenda, what we've lined up, we have a couple of exercises. So initially, the benefits and critique, we really just want to get those on the table, because the SDG framework, it's got a lot of value, but it's got a downside as well. So just an opportunity to explore that. Also want to take just a minute to look at, what the current landscape is around sustainable consumption at Concordia in terms of related activities. We'll then spend some time, an exercise that will focus in on the targets that are attached to this particular SDG before moving, well, we'll have a break, but then we'll move into the brainstorm, which is really what we want to spend most time on. And really looking at that critical question there of how might the SDG framework help to increase the impact of Concordia's activities related to responsible consumption and production. So I think that's it. This, of course, is all part of the voluntary university review that is underway at Concordia and will be an important part of the inputs to that. So back to you, Jason.
Great. So the first thing we're going to do here is just quickly fly through the two sides of the coin with respect to the SDGs. And I'm going to share with you some commonly articulated benefits of this framework, look at the other side of the equation, which is some of the common critiques, and just give folks a chance to respond, situate themselves, or elaborate on anything that they see here. So we're just going to go, relatively quickly, but just want to give a sense, give people a chance to kind of like articulate their position vis-a-vis this framework, because like Monica said, it's highly beneficial, but it has some problematics that we want to make sure are on the table before we dive into engaging on the targets in this particular SDG. So on the positive side of the ledger, we have the fact that the SDGs help to create a common agenda, and they facilitate collaboration around shared goals, which was really the benefit of this framework that I articulated at the start that I see as highly beneficial. They also connect economic, social, and environmental aspects of sustainability. The SDGs build on a previous set of goals, the Millennium Development Goals, which were specifically focused on addressing poverty in the developing world. The SDGs expand out to include social and environmental aspects of sustainability that were not included in the MDGs. They, in the third case there, they place emphasis on clear and concrete targets and outcomes. It's not just high-level goals, it's specific things that are being targeted and specific indicators associated with each of those targets. And the last benefit is that they build a sense of urgency by establishing 2030 as a crucial deadline. So that's the positive side of the ledger. And if we look at some of the critiques of the SDG framework, one of them is that because they're so vast, 17 goals and incorporating economic, social, and environmental aspects of sustainability, it's hard to know where to start and how to engage. So that's the flip side of comprehensiveness, is that it seems overwhelming sometimes, just given the vastness of the array in this framework. They also, the SDGs have failed to adequately take into account the rights, interests, and perspectives of Indigenous peoples. A few weeks ago, we had a presenter, Danica Littlechild, who actually took part in the deliberations prior to the ratification of the SDGs in 2015 and articulated the pretty alarming constraints on the participation of Indigenous peoples and the articulation and validation process for the goals. The SDGs have also been critiqued in that they don't go far enough in addressing root problems. So just articulate targets, but don't really get at the underlying systems that drive, that result in the kinds of outcomes that we see. And there are critiques also that the SDGs can be internally contradictory. And the paradigm case there is that can you pursue economic growth at the same time that you protect ecosystems and biodiversity? So these are the kinds of things that are commonly critiqued. Just want to give folks a chance to add on some of their own sense of the benefits or critiques, elaborate on anything you see here, or just kind of make any comments that you would like to make about the framework as a whole before we dive into the specifics of SDG 12. So you can raise a hand. If nobody's talking, you can just jump in with your mic, or you can even use the chat if you like, but I'd just like to hear from a couple folks. And we'll also, while you're thinking of how you want to respond, welcome Bart, thanks for joining. Bart Simon, Director of Milieu, Sociology and Anthropology prof. Anything else I'm missing, Bart? That's it. Welcome, thanks for joining. we're just we just did a quick rundown, Bart, of we're kind of situating ourselves vis-a-vis the SDG framework and just articulated some of the benefits and critiques and just giving people a chance to kind of like chime in on that. And then we're going to dive down into looking at the Concordia landscape and then thinking about the actual targets articulated for this SDG. So anybody want to jump in on the question or the issue of the benefits and critiques? Arian.
I think to extend beyond the fact that it doesn't take into account Indigenous communities is that it's often very limited in who can access engaging in the SDGs themselves. I mean, we're a pretty white crowd here today. I mean, that's kind of a factor of, in a way, the institution we are at Concordia, and we're making strides. We have the Black Perspectives Office, we have the Indigenous Directions Office as well, they're starting to make change, but change that is a little late in the game. So how do we, as large institutions like Concordia, like cities, like countries, take time to invite people that otherwise wouldn't have access to making these big changes within their communities by offering them seats at the table? I think that's really, really crucial to making this inclusive across the globe.
Yeah, super points. And really, yeah, really appreciate that, Arian. Carmela, do you want to add something?
Yeah, well, I just picked up my hand before Arian spoke, so it's going to be a little different from what you just said. Okay. So on my end, some of the critiques I have with responsible consumption or sustainable consumption and production is that often there's a tendency to rely on the kind of low-hanging fruit, both on the production and consumption side, and that there are tendencies also to make things less bad rather than to make things different. And therefore, the question of sustainable production and consumption doesn't really allow that framework, especially because it's embedded in the, if we think of where it's embedded, sustainable production and consumption, it comes from the World Business Council on the WBSB, World Business Council on Sustainable Development. And therefore, for them, eco-efficiency is the premise of which sustainable production and consumption is embedded within. And therefore, if we have that framework, we are excluding a lot. Mm-hmm. And I think that is problematic in the way that we move forward in sustainable cities, sustainable design, sustainable neighborhoods, whatever it is, because we need to do things differently and not less impactful.
Mm-hmm. So it's, a parallel there is like, the point isn't just to electrify everybody's cars. It's
exactly, because that doesn't do anything. That doesn't do anything. That still has the multitude of roads that we need, the infrastructure for cars, et cetera, et cetera. So having electrification of cars is especially problematic for me because it's exactly that point.
Yeah.
Sorry, could I jump on top of that quickly? I just want a direct response to what Carmela said. And to, as an institution, as a place of research, can we break the barrier of going beyond the finite resources that we're using to electrify the planet? We are essentially repeating history with the electric car right now by mining finite resources like lithium across the globe and displacing communities. Can we, as an institution, one that pushes the boundaries of sustainability in terms of material research and things like that, come up with, renewable sources for this thirst for electrification? And I think we can, and it probably is already happening because we're such a big place. But I would really like to see that in the coming years, that we're sort of leading the way, leading the charge. Pardon the pun, but to change the base materials that we use for electrification.
Arian, that's super great train of thought, and we wish we could just jump into the ideation piece. We have a few things to get to first, but you're right there. You're right there in terms of like what we might try to do as an institution. Faysal, yeah, Faysal, sorry.
Don't worry about it. So I'll say it enough times and then you'll get it. Faysal. So just to kind of echo Carmela's sentiments, like less bad is generally the vibe I get from the UN SDGs. And it is framed in that terminology like sustainable development. And that's fine because we do want like everybody to have reached that level of living that, you know, is we kind of see as required to be healthy and prosper. I just read Tim Jackson's Prosperity Without Growth. Has anybody else read that yet? So, I mean, I'm catching up, but I think it makes some pretty strong arguments about growth and, you know, the challenge of like reaching sustainability while growing. I think that has to be part of the conversation. You can't ignore that elephant in the room. And it's a very big challenge to like reach these goals without growth, or to like flourish as a society without growth. Like economists see that as kind of the way forward. So I just want to throw that on the table. I think absolute decoupling is definitely required. And I think the UN SDGs also don't necessarily look at planetary boundaries. I think that's sort of missing when we talk about like scientific guiding principles. So if that was injected in, I think it would be a more robust framework. And I don't think it's in there right now.
Yeah. So if you can imagine the SDG, you've seen the pinwheel, SDG pinwheel, like think of donut economics layered onto the SDG pinwheel. There we go, right? We got the marketing figured out at least. Any other last quick comments with respect to benefits and critiques of this framework? If not, we're going to dive into just kind of look, first of all, get a sense of what's happening on the landscape at Concordia, and then think about the targets that are articulated for this SDG before we all arrive where Ariane already is, which is being ready to to think about the big ideas. No? Okay, so we'll move on. We'll move forward with Monica walking us through the Concordia landscape.
Yeah, so here we're trying to develop a picture of what's already happening at Concordia around sustainable consumption and production patterns. We've begun to map this out to some degree, but this isn't a tagging exercise. It's just to really put on the table what's happening. And to have a quick review of that. So it's organized in the 3 columns in terms of research chairs and initiatives, obviously the LSRC, a number of other initiatives. Unfortunately, we have Bart here for the milieu. So Alice was to join us, unfortunately, late. Anton Shevko, who is from JMSB, his work obviously important in this space. Martin Racine from Design and Computational Arts as well, doing some really, really interesting work around prolonging the lifespan of consumer products. So in the center then, we have a number of different academic programs and learning experiences, sustainability studies, the relatively new Department of Chemical and Materials Engineering. We have a Masters of Design, the Sustainability Ecosystem. There's also a new program that's being proposed, the MILIS, the Major in Leadership in Sustainability, that Ray and I have been involved in, probably some others as well, but it's a 42 credit major that will really focus on developing Concordia's position in leadership and the communication and engagement that is involved with that, as well as the sustainability, the core sustainability piece. In terms of various other initiatives, the Sustainability Action Plan, obviously critical here, the Zero Waste Initiative, of course, the Center for Creative Reuse, the Waste Not, Want Not Initiative, DISH project, and we have a slide as well, given how the Sustainability Action Plan has captured many of the some aspects of the goals related to SDG 12. We thought we'd just flag those as well, just put them on the radar as part of the conversation here. A number of these that are very relevant to what we can perhaps do. And the question here is really how the framework can enhance what we're doing, whether it challenges us to do more. This isn't about, as Anders correctly, and I think Jason and I and David and Prem certainly agree that we do not want to just tick off that we're doing things, but really asking, how can the framework help us, and particularly focus around targets, to really challenge us to do more, to question what we're doing, to think about how we might do more. So it's really at that level that we just want to flag what's already there, because sometimes it's easier to build on what's already in place and to do more than to start from scratch. So that's the idea behind putting these before you. And I also just want to quickly flag the publications. Obviously, there's all sorts of issues around how we measure research impact, but I think it's still worth just flagging this one in terms of the contributions we're making in that area, just based on some standard but problematic bibliometrics. SDG 12, 74 publications there. We're obviously contributing in that space relative to, I think it's interesting to see from this slide how active we are in that space relative to some of the other SDGs, more in terms of just kind of the general conversation we're having as an institution. Where are we focusing our efforts? Where do we need to do more? Because sometimes this slide can help us think about, where are we not that active and where should we be active? And the targets, that discussion around targets that we'll have will help deepen our discussion on that. But I just want to take a few minutes, just if you see particular gaps, anything that we're missing from that landscape, here's an opportunity to flag that.
A couple things in the chat that's helpful. We will record those. Anybody else have any?
Thanks, Bart. Thanks, Jason. Jordan, got those.
Good. So it looks like nothing super major that's missing.
I mean, the thing about this SDG is it's, and one of the reasons I guess I sort of like it is it's like at least broad enough that a lot more disciplines can be represented than the average SDG. If you look at that top two SDGs, the weight of publications there comes from the sciences where they publish more. That's how it works. I mean, my guess is we haven't quite done enough justice to the landscape survey here in terms of individuals working on totally related topics. Even in my department, I just don't know enough about my own faculty members in sociology and anthropology, but I could, I for sure, 100% for sure, there's some dovetailing going on, but a lot depends on how we come down in terms of defining targets within this very broad, kind of mushy SDG, which is sort of why I'm interested, because there's not a lot of room to maneuver in other SDGs if we're going to play with them, which is why I think this one's interesting. So yeah, I can't add enough concrete, but my guess, my sense of your initial picture is we're really missing a lot, especially from the humanities, social science, culture side, which often doesn't get represented too well in these surveys because of the way the work happens in those sectors.
We've also gone after, just in terms of being able to get this, we've gone after things that have a high degree of visibility and discoverability, so websites and program level CURCs and so forth, rather than individual publications or the individual research program of people. But
yeah, my guess is that these are like that level of visibility, because there's a lot of folks I know in the social sciences that have a lot of community projects. They work very closely with external partners and around the world in these kinds of projects, but you wouldn't, you just wouldn't see them in the same kind of like visibility survey, because it's just not that important, or it's taking different, it's representing in different ways. But you're right. I mean, it's important to look at the things that are sort of be above the individual productivity level. But I think there is a lot going on that we should dig for if we pursue this.
And of course, there's a much broader conversation happening about how we recognize research outputs, and an increasing recognition given to bibliometrics has been particularly inadequate especially for other disciplines, so the social sciences and humanities and research creation. But that idea, that focus around inclusive excellence, and a lot of attention being given to finding alternative metrics and ways of recognizing that type of contribution.
I was just going to jump in, Carmela. I debate. I'm the one responsible for putting things or not putting things on that Concordia landscape slide, and I was like, what meets the criteria and what kind of fits the targets, and I debated actively about the inclusion of your CRC on there as well. And like Bart said, it's mushy and the edges are really undefined. But
yeah, but I just
kind of capture the gist, and then recognizing that there's a whole lot of other stuff that we can't.
No, but it's really important what Bart said, because it's sorry, Ray. Ray, I just want to add, because what Bart is saying is a kind of an ongoing struggle.
Yeah.
You know, it's like doing laundry. It never stops. You know, it's like we have to get at it, and we have to like get past that kind of blockage that we have within the institution, and that we're not alone in that. We do need to recognize all of those extra activities. You know, even a thing like any activity like an ideas competition that comes out with alternate ideas of something that even sometimes are not attainable, develops a dialogue that is far beyond some of the things that are put in some of these peer-reviewed journals. What I'm saying is that, we have to get there, like, as an institution.
I just add that we're in the process of striking a task force on inclusive excellence, where we really are going to have some very focused conversations around that. There's a lot happening around this declaration on research assessment that the tri-agencies and FRQ signed on to. So calling on the research community to think about other ways of measuring success and research productivity. NSERC just released their assessment guidelines this week, a really interesting document. So we're very much in that space, and I think it's really important for us to connect these conversations to the larger conversations out there. Ray.
So I guess I'm taking a few steps back, but I'll try not to be too repetitive. I actually want to say that I found it interesting to hear Bart's perspective, because one of the reasons why I find interest in this SDG is because it feels like it's clear in ways that the others aren't. We're dealing with material use, energy use. We're dealing with the ability to connect our actions to impacts in ways that I feel are much more, I'm not sure how to say this without coming across as insensitive, but much more impactful in terms of our future societal survival. If not survival, certainly resilience and growth, than broader concepts of well-being or social justice. I mean, I want to take a full-throated assertion that if we don't figure out a way around the problems connecting material use to emissions output, much of the rest is just not that important.
Thanks, Ray. Excellent.
Thank you.
Ariane?
I want to touch on two things, sort of echoing what Carmela was saying and going a step further is how can we highlight and I forget the word that you just used, Monica, but highlight non-peer reviewed research that's happening at Concordia at the undergraduate level even. I mean, the Sustainability Action Fund has annual research awards that they have. It just happened, I think, about a week ago. Faysal is one of the recipients of one of those awards for his PhD work. But how are we highlighting them within the institution and then external to the institution to show what we're doing, no matter how small the research is, that we're highlighting that we are making changes in the broader sustainability world, because I feel like more often than not, you have to have been peer reviewed and able to get a spotlight on what you're doing. I think that's really unfortunate. Obviously, it's warranted, but I think it's unfortunate for those that are doing great work, even within the graduate level, but especially in the undergraduate level, that just don't have those opportunities to get to that level of publication. So I think it's important to highlight them as well. Oh, and I forgot my other point. It had to do with what Raymond was talking about. I would, and this goes into ideation, I'm sorry, Jason, but could we as an institution exist without consuming from the outside world for a year? Because there's so much in the world, there's so much at Concordia. I see a lot of it every day in my work at the center. And there's like, we keep buying new furniture and things like that. Could we just use what we already have? And we have to be really, really creative about how we reuse it.
That's great hearing. I think some of us did it when we were in lockdown, right? Yeah, when a great experiment. Bart. You're muted, Bart.
Just a rider on what Ray was saying, because I do 100%. I kind of agree in a weirdly flipped way, because I was attracted by these words production and consumption, which spoke sociology to me. So I was like, yeah, thank God. There's something to be said, and also something interesting about the fact that these are terms and the sort of social responsibility, or somehow they nicely allow us to tackle the very question that Ray's getting at from different perspectives. They're inviting different disciplinary perspectives. It's the most interdisciplinary of problems. And what I like to challenge my students with is the fact that consumption is not a bad thing. So it's okay to consume, but what do you mean consumption when you want to use it in the negative? And so, whether we talk about the economic system or capitalism or anything, these things, at least these terms can now fly in to the conversation, so that when we're now also dealing with, and I think, Kamral is right, this SDG is for the corporate sector more than anything else. Other SDGs seem to be targeted at the engineers, and other SDGs, the scientists, and so on and so forth. This one seems to be speaking to sort of economic policy and business policy, I suppose, but strangely allows for conversations and research projects to take place, sort of if we slightly reinterpret what's going on there. Not that there isn't good academic industry conversations that wouldn't happen around this SDG, because obviously there's a demand for the industries to do something. I mean, people have been mentioning that. So not nothing, but something. But it's weird that whatever they do would be good enough in this sort of less bad kind of way. And so our intervention there could be about steering, riding that conversation and then steering it off where it's starting to go. So there's maybe a little bit of a, there's a wave to jump on with the board and then like take off in a different direction than where I suspect most other universities will take this SDG.
Which you think will be what, Bart? Which is just focused on internal economies? And
I don't know. I mean, Jordan can talk about, I think this will be an SDG for business schools. I think I mean, yes, policy. I mean, maybe we'll see community action kind of initiatives connected to this SDG at other universities. I don't know. I mean, it's worth the next step, because I looked at the impact rankings, and of course I'm I just have to add this, like, for such an important and epic world-changing thing, that we should be all competing on SDGs just seems insane. And that somehow governments are going to decide we're better or worse when we're trying to like solve world problems. I just love it. So, but different universities are obviously angling to promote different kinds of projects with respect to those SDGs. It'll be very interesting to see the positioning going on, since it does seem to be a kind of common language for the younger universities to get rankings. And we should be watching that closely and seeing how our internal discussions jive or not jive with what's going on elsewhere.
No, Jordan or Ray wanted to come in on that in terms of business schools, just to respond to that part, but lots there. Thanks, Bart.
Maybe I can jump. I have a bit of an issue with calling this or attributing this SDG more to a business school industry, because I can see tons of opportunities to connect with other spheres, with other domains. If I'm trying to bring about a more responsible approach to consumption, I might as well go study some of the folks in southern Mexico who do incredible stuff with very little resources, and to study how they embed that in their own value structure, or how that comes out of their value structure, and I can find inspiration to craft campaigns or talk to industry. And I think it's even broader than that. I mean, you try to convince industry partners that haven't seen the light and who still adhere to, let's just maximize shareholder value, and they're going to go la 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 la, and less bad is good enough in that perspective. So if we're trying to change that narrative, business schools alone are not going to do it. We need all the help we can get. And in fact, I've been a great advocate of sending our business school student out to connect with other faculties, with other departments, to get exposed to other ways of thinking. I mean, in business school, I'm sorry, I'm very critical of business schools myself. I mean, we seem to think that we figured it all out, but crap, we've been responsible for over half of the problems we're experiencing. So if we're going to change that, we're not going to change that alone. Sorry, I went off there.
Thanks, Jordan. I mean, certainly lots around the values. I know working with Indigenous communities, like in one particular community I work, the whole thing around greed and the social sanctioning around greed is really powerful. You know, when people are seeing as, oh, you know, the greedy person, they keep accumulating things and they're not good for sharing. I mean, it's a really powerful, it's a really powerful control on behavior. Carmela.
Yeah, I want to add what Bart and Jordan were talking about in terms of being restricted or not to business endeavors. Of course, to a large part, we can see it automatically being that, because Sustainable Consumption Productions Framework is first and foremost sourced from the World Business Council, so it comes from a business world. But the way that we need to reinterpret, for me, this new way of responsible consumption and production cannot remain there, and that's, I think, that what is being said. And the reason why is that all kinds of whether they're community-based projects, civic-based projects, which is not necessarily business, civic-based projects, the way provisioning is done, okay, that could be business, okay. But civic-based projects, you know, design-based projects, community-based projects, stuff that is not directly related to a business organization has the impact when you start building the kind of system interrelationships of what is impacted and the dynamics of that ecosystem will make us eventually, if we do things right, and if we model our ideas properly, we'll be able to kind of project into the future ways that we can do things so differently that we will be reducing these resources. And I'm not saying just doing things better, doing things differently, and then therefore having a real impact. So I'm not sure if I'm being clear at all, but meaning that, yes, there is a business side, and yes, probably most things do touch the business side, but lots of stuff can happen outside the business side, like in areas that are more ground up or civic based, that can have a direct impact in terms of how consumption in the end takes place. You know, if we build our cities differently, people would be forced to do things differently, move around the city differently, eat at different places, buy different things to eat, or whatever, or wear, or whatever. And therefore, from a connected level, things would be less intense at the kind of footprint level. And but it's so that's why I've always had a problem with the term responsible consumption or sustainable production and consumption. It kind of categorizes these things. I know, Raymond, you think that they're very clear, but I think their clarity is also sometimes a weakness. You know, sometimes I feel it's a bit of a weakness because it kind of pigeonholes us into thinking that we have to do things that are easily measurable, and sometimes things are not easily measurable because there's so much uncertainty in the way that we will plan to do things differently, and those risks are worth it. Anyways, I just, that's my 2 cents.
Ray, you've got to respond. Your hands up anyway.
So I am by no means the person you want on stage for a full-throated defense of business and industry. However, I do feel it's important to note that we are, with the exception of climate and environmental pollution, we are going in the right direction. And that is largely due to industrialization over the past century. That's an awkward thing to say, especially outside of the business school in these conversations. But that's something that I think is important for us to acknowledge. Simply the fact that we're allowed to talk to each other using this mediated technology is due to a generation worth of business innovation. What I'm really interested in, and I'm glad to follow Carmela on this, is changes in behavior, changes in design of how the world around us, our communities are built. Those are not business level problems. Those are government and society level problems. And like I said, I'm not here to defend business and let it off the hook, but any conversation about consumption that fails to acknowledge the rules that government has put in place is failing to actually address the problem head on. And that is where I struggle. This is actually where I struggle with my own research and my own teaching at the moment, because I believe business is going in the right direction. It's not going nearly fast enough. But it's not going to go any faster until the rules are changed, and the rules will only be changed by government. And so there is a level of analysis problem that we're having here. So thank you.
Thank you. Alex, conscious of the time as well. Yeah, come on in, Alex, to hear from you.
Yeah, I'm going to have to leave soon, unfortunately, because I have a meeting I have to attend. But I just wanted to shoot in my 2 cents about creating a culture of reduced consumption and more knowledge about waste and the effects of waste, because as someone who's presented to a lot of youth, I think outreach to youth is really important, because a lot of these things are, to develop that culture, it's like the habits are already formed for a lot of the older generations, even including my own generation. But the youth are so open to finding solutions and to changing their habits, and they haven't really developed a lot of those habits of consumption and waste yet on their own. So I think there's always more opportunities to outreach to youth, and in my experience, they're really open to these ideas, and I think that's a really important step to changing the culture aspect of that, and that these sustainable development goals, like I know there's mention of making that culture in there, and I think that's something that's really important. And as Concordia, as experts in these things, outreaching to the youth and sort of making those connections, I think is something really important as well.
Thanks, Alex. I'm sorry you won't be around because that sounds like something quite targeted that we could, you know, we could be including in the brainstorming, but we look forward to getting your inputs at another time. Carmela, you have to leave as well. Are you okay for a little while or? Sorry. If
I can stay until about 3:15.
Okay.
And then I have to cut. I'll be 15 minutes late, but it doesn't matter.
But just put up your, like, if you, before you leave, if you can warn us and kind of give us.
Okay, I will. Okay.
Your exit statement. Faysal?
Yeah, just building off of Alex's comment and Raymond's as well. Like, yes, the level of activity or what we're targeting, the level that we're targeting is really critical to this conversation. And at the same time, I think I can recognize, and I think we can all recognize that consumption is just this daily activity we all engage in, and that is just such an opportunity to engage with people because we're all actively doing it all the time, right? I think we feel a little disconnected from some of the greenhouse gas conversations because, like at Concordia, for example, we know it's our buildings that are responsible, and I can't change the design of the buildings unless I'm in facilities management. But and so it's outside of my scope of influence. But then there's this consumption that we're all doing, and we have these points of contact where we buy things and we make these choices and then we dispose of things. And so there's a lot of moments to really like shift the expectations, the norms, and the communications around, you know, what we expect of everybody. And that's not the rules yet. Like that's, you know, these points of engagement, but maybe through those points of engagement, we can create this funnel of like engagement that allows people to eventually become advocates for governments to shift, right? Like they, you know, they participate, they try to do better, they try to buy better, they try to sort better. They see these messages that say like, we're trying to get to this place, and it's up to you, but also it's up to all of us, and it's up to governments as well. And so I don't know, there's something there. I've always felt, and others feel the same way, like my supervisor, Ketra, always talks about like how we need to get people to engage in the policy conversations. I don't know, I'm gonna throw that idea out there is like, how can we use Concordia as an opportunity to engage in policy conversations and advocacy as citizens? I think people are ready to do that. It's just, how do we do it?
Great, thank you. That's a very clear statement. We'll definitely be picking up in the brainstorm. Jason, over to you, because I'm conscious of the time and the looming target exercise.
Yeah, great. I mean, great conversation. It's really rolling. It's fabulous to just do this. We have some things we wanted to move toward in terms of like relatively concrete thinking about which of the targets that the UN has articulated or that we may articulate for ourselves that we think there's an opportunity to focus on at Concordia and really leverage. Somewhat, Bart, thinking about your point about how we as an institution can go some distinctive directions with our efforts related to this SDG. And then we're gonna really open the floor for the brainstorming. We'll do this target exercise fairly quickly, take a quick break so the folks can stretch the legs, use the washroom, grab a coffee, and then we'll end with our ideation piece. So in front of you here, you have 11 targets that are articulated for this SDG. It's more than normal. Usually most SDGs have 5, 6, 7, 8. There are a lot of them here. What we're going to ask you to do is we're going to run a poll. We'd like you to identify which of these 11, which 3 of these 11 you think Concordia either has the most to contribute to as an institution or that are most relevant for us, because we have to remember these UN targets are articulated for country level activities. These are articulated for national governments. We're a university, we have to do that translation. And this goes back to the point that I think Anders made about how do we translate these goals through our own context and our own sphere of influence. So what we're going to do is ask you to scan. You see both the headlines there and the descriptors after them. If the text isn't quite readable enough for you, you can enlarge that screen on your Zoom window, or look at these are also included in the packet that we sent out in advance. We're going to ask you to pick 3 that you think that are most relevant to Concordia, and or that we have the most to contribute to. If you can't think across the whole of the institution, think about your own domain, your own sphere. Where do you think your interests are most closely aligned? If you can't kind of like picture at Concordia where the most expertise is on these issues. So we're going to put up a poll here, run a poll quickly, discuss the results, and then we're going to flip the coin and say, okay, if we were articulating our own targets, building on what's already in the Sustainability Action Plan, what might we set for ourselves as an aspirational goal? But we're going to start with this, take these at face value, look at what the UN has articulated and say which of these are most relevant to us as an institution. Note that because there are so many targets, they don't all fit on one poll screen. So there are actually two sections to the poll, question 1, question 2, and that's just to allow for all these targets to be fit into the poll. So take 2 minutes, scan these. Again, you just have the headlines there. If you need the descriptors that go after them, you can use the packet or enlarge the window on your Zoom screen and identify 3 that you think are most relevant or that we have the most to contribute to as a university. Faysal, if you don't have hands, I can also vote for you.
I've got one hand on
Okay.
the mouse. I can do it.
Oh, Bart did 4, of course, cheater.
It was a mistake. It was a mistake. I didn't mean to do it. Honest.
I don't think it's letting us submit if we don't select any of the options in the bottom portion of your,
Oh, maybe that was my problem.
Oh.
because I've selected 3 and it won't let me submit.
See, it was not my fault.
No, I guess you're right. Interesting facet. We haven't faced this conundrum before, I don't think.
Or maybe I'm doing,
No, you might be right because it might be both required. Maybe they're both required questions. Let's see, how do we solve this problem? Vote for 12C and we'll disregard the results for 12C and just let people speak up for it if they wanted to defend it. Yeah, Bart, David and Prem got a flash intro.
Yeah, I figured.
Yeah, they're hovering in the background. Does anybody else need a little bit more time? Does everybody put in their results? And we're good to go. What do we have here in terms of the outcomes of our poll? Move it to another window so we can make it all readable. Amazing, there is consensus around reducing waste generation. Awesome. Near consensus, 80% around promoting universal understanding of sustainable lifestyles. And then a couple 60%, well, 160% around supporting developing countries' scientific and technological capacity. We will take 12C with a grain of salt around removing market distortions. Unless somebody wants to speak up for that. And then 12.1 also has some substantial, 12.1 and 12.7, implementing 10-year sustainable consumption and production framework and promoting sustainable procurement practices. So who wants to defend their choices, whether they were in line with the consensus here or out of line? Be interested to hear. Ariane.
So I put 12.A. The other ones above that, we're doing a lot already in terms of our sustainability action plan, and particularly the zero waste stream of that plan. That covers most of everything from 12.1 to 12.8. So I'm not going to talk about that. I checked 12.A because I think we actually have to do that as a developed country first. We can't go and tell a developing nation how to do it if we can't do it ourselves properly.
Mhm.
So that's my sort of critique about that section, because I'm not really sure about the tourism bit. That seems a bit of a weird thing to talk about in terms of that. And market distortions, I mean, that's a whole other conversation that we can have for another 2 hours. So
Yeah, yeah. Good, thanks. Mala.
Okay, yeah, because I'm going to leave after this, if that's okay.
Okay.
Okay, so I had the three that I chose were, reduce waste generation, because that's kind of a low-hanging fruit, although it's not that easy. And I know Faysal's work is completely on that. Public procurement practices. In other words, procurement practices here at Concordia. I have a PhD student who's working on procurement practices in universities and how hard it is to change the way we buy things. And so that, to me, is an easy one, but I think there's a lot of red tape around it. And so I think that would be something that we can easily address. And all the reasons that Ariane talked about, because I also took 12.8. For me, that's it's a really important one, because even though it's not the individual humans that are causing the most damage in the world, it is the organizations. It is the individual lifestyles change that will put pressure on the organization's way of doing stuff. So for me, this is a fundamental one for us to work towards. Yeah.
Thanks, Carmela. And any ideas that you want to put on the table in terms of what Concordia might want to do? Like, what's our big ambition around sustainable consumption and production? Shoot us an email.
Okay, perfect. Okay, yeah. Right. Thank you very much. And thank you for this great conversation. This is super. Bye. Bye. Bye.
Jordan.
I don't know if I was the only one, but as I was answering this, in the back of my mind, I just kept thinking about what is our mission and what is realistic to ask us to do as a institution of higher education. You take something like 12C, remove market distortions. If that had read, promote values and behaviors that eliminate wasteful consumption, okay, then I can get behind that, because then it's educating students ourselves about values and different modes of behavior. But removing market distortions, I don't see that as aligned with our mission. And so as I was answering, some looked attractive to Jordan as a citizen, but to Jordan as a professor in a business school belonging to a university with a certain mission that's publicly funded, some of those became then not so much attractive to that Jordan.
Yeah, and that's exactly the flip side of this exercise, is wanting to, and I've actually asked you to capture that thought about if 12C had said blank. Can you put that in the chat? Because what we're wanting to do on the flip side of the exercise is to say, like, if we were articulating these for ourselves, what would they be?
Okay.
So yeah, so if you could capture that. And any other comments about, again, these targets as is that the UN has articulated for countries. I'm curious, Anders, if you have a comment about what you think. Were you already doing that translation in your own mind about thinking about which of these are most relevant to universities? And if you
I definitely noted the similar thing as Jordan, as I was going through them, that some of them seem very targeted to policymakers at the national level. In terms of, I'm actually not sure that I even had time to hit the submit button.
Okay.
I'm not really sure, but I was pretty aligned with what's the name of the woman that just left, Carmela? Yeah, I was pretty aligned with her. I also think the whole public procurement, even though it sounds kind of boring, I think there's a lot of things to gain there as an institution.
Mm-hmm.
I was also debating between choosing the thing around enabling developing countries to have better production and consumption. It was phrased something like that, because on one hand, it does sound kind of patronizing. Is that the right word? Like, we have our stuff under control, and now we're going to teach you how to do your stuff. So it can easily come off. It's not very nice sounding, but on the other hand, there are a lot of ways things are produced today in India, in Brazil, in China that are extremely dirty. So it's not that we have everything under control. We have giant consumption, like our consumption-based emissions are much higher than people in India and Brazil and China, but the way they produce their things, it does need to change. And I think there's a lot of things that can take place with technology transfer and transfer of knowledge, and but the learning also goes the other way, of course.
Yeah.
So I was a little bit debating on that one.
Yeah.
I'll stop talking now.
No, that's great to hear. And I mean, this is one of the questions that we faced in these conversations multiple times is how much are we prone to just thinking about our own institution or even our own city, as opposed to our potential reach and international involvement in pursuing and achieving the SDGs, and that rears its head here as well again. Bart, do you want to comment?
Yeah, sort of riffing on Jordan a little bit. I mean, the targets depend on your point of view. So I don't know, maybe it is just me. I always read these things in any kind of strategic plan through either rankings or the funneling of money or the recruiting of students or these kinds of practical things. And that really depends on, so like the targets for the organization, like Concordia as an organization, are different than research targets, right?
Yeah.
So we can write papers on what's the one about the market distortion. All right, we can't deal with market distortions, but we can create economic models and this, that's, and the other things, and write about other people's market distortions and produce papers, basically, as well as all the other stuff that goes with research. That's probably the main way I'm reading these targets in university terms, but you could see them as teaching targets, curricular targets, or you could see them as sort of organizational targets, like let's change Concordia's own procurement processes. So like my filter is the research portfolio, always has been. So my picks sort of reflect my thinking and my feeling about both what's visible at Concordia and what the research capacity is best poised to contribute to. I guess I did pick 4, but the fourth was on that the one that was it Ray, somebody that the scientific developing country scientific capacity, which I actually agree with, given the kinds of partnerships that I see around me, at least in my part of the campus. And these are less about us solving problems for them and much more the reverse, or at least co-making and co-production types of research around these questions of consumption. And that's a really fruitful growth area, which I think is very attractive to students and our international students as well, at least at Milieu. So that's my particular read on my choices, which pretty much closely reflects the sort of majorities in that sense.
Yeah. So 12A about the developing countries' capacity. Which others do you recall?
The waste reduction, which I think is a research strength in a lot of different ways. I mean, the targets actually, there's stuff missing from the targets that should be there, circular economy stuff and also, you know, stuff about the future of work and platforms, co-ops. Like there's so many features to this that could be there that we're missing. So I picked, and then, I did pick implement of the 10-year sustainable consumption, because that's like, could be anything. It's like, well, how could anybody not write about that? That's easy. Anything we write contributes to that. And the universal the sustainable lifestyle. So that fits very well, obviously, with a lot of the work that people have been talking about here already. The reaching out to youth stuff, I think, is right on the money in terms of where some of our historic strengths lie, and sort of thinking through lifestyle in that sense. Yeah,
that's great. That's super helpful, Bart. I thought I had a question, but I can't remember now. I'll let Anders chime in again, and then I'll see if I can remember what it was.
Thanks. Yeah, it was just to say that I very much agree with Bart's comment on trying to distinguish between some of the targets mainly talking into how Concordia operates as an organization, such as procurement, and other targets mainly relating to the way what we teach students and the impact of our research. Of course, these two things are not neatly separated. I think initiatives to reduce waste, to promote plant-based food and reduce food waste, all of these things can hopefully also have an effect on how students and researchers behave outside the university, in addition to helping reduce the environmental impact of the university as an institution. So I think that's a good way. It's a good thing to have in mind when we go forward with these targets.
Bart, my question actually, I'm remembering now, it's not a question, but more of a prompt, and thinking about capturing, again, like in the chat or something, just capturing those elements that you see missing from these targets that we might consider orienting around or integrating into our own thinking about consumption and production. Like, I noted them down, but it's helpful to have them captured there. Just looking quickly at the chat, Ariane, you already have, looks like you've already done your homework. Putting very specific sets of objectives there about 2040. Are these in the Sustainability Action Plan, or these are in addition to that? Or
yeah, these are essentially the core of the zero waste stream part of the action plan that was developed a few years back. Yep. So it speaks to that 10-year plan that was asked of us earlier. So
right,
yeah,
cool. Raymond, I don't know if you want to elaborate on your comment there.
Well, I feel like it fits at least tangentially with where we're going. Some of these points, most notably, 12B is not relevant to us. That's the government's job, period. We're not going to change subsidies for various materials and how they're used. Yeah. I think these are great targets. It's great to know we have them. I have to admit, I didn't know we had gotten to that stage yet. So I'm glad to hear that. And this is where we could excel as researchers and scholars. Are we getting there fast enough? The scientific consensus gives us a pretty good idea of what our runway is for making these changes. Not the least of which is we have our own carbon clock, which I checked at the beginning of the meeting. So we got less than 10 years. So I'd like whatever, I don't have specific metrics, whatever metrics we choose, I would actually like them to at least attempt to be tied to the science and not to the politics.
Very good. I'm just going to note here that we had booked in a break for folks, but we're on a roll. Do folks just want to finish out the last half hour, or do they need to take 2 minutes? Good to go? Anybody, how about this? Anybody that needs to pop off and grab a cup of coffee or stretch your legs, use the washroom, whatever, go ahead and do that. Otherwise, I think we're just going to keep rolling on through here, because we have the momentum going. Because really what we're trying to do now is articulate, going from these targets that we've started to throw out for ourselves around what we as a university might orient our efforts around, whether they're our own consumption production economies or in what we teach and research. What might we articulate as our own targets, and what might we set for ourselves as interesting objectives that we would articulate, and the things that we would do to help get ourselves there. So this is the what should we do part of the conversation that's transitioning from the what targets might we set for ourselves. So I'd be curious, Bart, are there ways to convene and orient and organize researchers around some of these subjects that surface their work, give it some visibility, and help to accelerate it? Are there ways that we can build on and extend what's in our sustainability action plan around food and waste, that's more inclusive of addressing some gaps that maybe the SDG targets point out to us? What are the things that we might undertake as an institution to really advance this consumption and production related goals that the SDGs compel us to act on?
I mean, I would I guess my gut feeling is that there's a huge amount of potential if we frame the research question right that can encourage participation, especially from the grad students and senior undergrads at the project level. So less about researchers sort of taking the high road and the people following if they do, but more about constructing a sort of framework for research initiatives where we know the labor will be sustained by students' own direct interest rather than being a research assistant for a professor or something along those lines. At least at Milieu, when we've experimented with this, we've been super successful at getting students from different disciplines working together on their own steam without, it's good to provide funding, but funding isn't the only reason they're doing this. So in fact, the more they do, the more it's possible to apply for funding and so on and so forth. But jump-starting new initiatives and getting people involved in it at a critical mass is tricky business unless you give one researcher a huge whack of money and that researcher hires a huge whack of people. And then they're only as good as whatever that one researcher is capable of pulling off. So, I do believe, since I'm collaborating now with the University of Edinburgh on some of the solar stuff that we're doing, I can see what happens when universities throw money at SDGs. And I'm like, okay, well, we'll keep making our solar games. You do your huge infrastructure projects and be impressive, and we'll come and visit. I think there must be a scale, a project of the right scale for us. We can't be shooting beyond our means and capacity, nor should we be banking on CERCs and shit like that to solve our problem. Like, we need something that will sit. So that's where I'd start that conversation. But then the targets are okay prompts. I guess I'm okay in terms of what Ray's saying, in terms of using the targets as prompts for constructing actual projects of the kind that I'm talking about.
Yeah. Well, any ideas about how to situate and structure those kinds of questions and opportunity, like the opportunity structures around those? Like, if you have any afterthoughts, just feel free to just shoot them our way. Ariane and Jordan next.
Okay, where do I start? I guess opportunity-wise, there is a Living Labs framework that is currently very heavily under development with the hopes of launching it. I hope, fingers crossed, sometime this coming academic year, that will give students an inroad into not only funding, but support when they are starting a sustainability-focused project on campus. And support not only at an institutional level, so they need an extra power outlet to plug in a machine to do X, then they will have the institutional support to make that happen. Or is it connecting them to other students doing similar research to then, scale up their project way beyond one student? I do want to say that when students are given the opportunity, sort of speaking to what Bart just said, they will go the distance. The Concordia Precious Plastics Project, which was started by a mechanical engineering student some years ago, as well as a design and computation arts student, have since grown their team to, I think, in some cases, depending on the semester, close to 50 students across all faculties. And they just keep absorbing new students into their project, and people are excited about it. We've crossed some hurdles with their project, helping them go forward. But essentially what they're doing is they're taking plastic waste that we produce within the institution and turning it into a new material that's available for students and researchers across the university. So truly closing the loop on our own plastic waste was really, really interesting to see that. And yesterday, as part of a new project within the Center for Creative Reuse, I met with a student, a master's student, who's going to be looking at our fiber waste, our fabric waste here at Concordia. Although not a lot, it might actually be more the more that we do research on it. But we're in the early stages of understanding what our fabric waste looks like at Concordia. And really what it comes down to me is how do we become an example for what we want to see in our city, what we want to see in our province, what we want to see in our country, what we want to see in the place that that is more and more commonly called Turtle Island and across the globe. How are we setting an example of how as larger institutions, as cities and so on, we can do it right? And we look at the recycling system and how absolutely broken it is. Can we as an institution set an example and maybe change the way, going back to what Carmilla was saying, how do we do it differently? And yeah, make a change that way. So I'll leave that there.
Revamp the entire recycling system. Drop your mic. That's it. Beautiful. Jordan, go ahead.
Two small comments. The first one maybe more high level, broader perspective. The second one definitely more down the trenches. First one picks up on a comment Bart made. I'd be very curious if we poll all profs, faculty at Concordia to gauge the level of what they know about the SDGs, their content, their sub goals, their origin. I think we might be surprised that some of our colleagues are, by virtue of what they do, the domain they're from, it's something they're not aware of or not intimately aware of. But where I'm going with this is, if this is something that's important to us as an organization, then we need to focus, we need to prioritize, we need to communicate on that, make it clear. Yes, we are the next gen university. Well, that's a nice slogan. But in reality, what does that mean if I'm a history professor, if I'm if that's the goal, if that's our priorities, then, let's make it clear. And I'm sorry, but I'm going to bring it back. A few years ago, if you recall, we used to get in the JMSB elevators and we had these nice posters of our 328 strategic priorities. I barely exaggerate, okay? And I remember listening into some of the conversation in the elevators about people's response to this. Gee, are we supposed to do all these things all at once? And there was like some confusion as to what's the direction? What are our marching orders? So I think if this is something that Concordia is really going to embrace, we need to make it clear and we need to communicate. My second comment is just sharing a very quick little thing I did a few years ago in my food marketing class. We had a project around food waste, and I tried to bring in something known as open innovation. We collaborated with a group of students at the Université de Montréal, another group at McGill, via a software that's designed to facilitate open collaboration. And at the end of the term, I had a meta learning or reflection exercise for my students. And I asked them, what did you think about this exercise? And one young lady shared with me, she said, sir, in all my years at JMSB, I am indoctrinated to think about competition. And here you are coming in on my third year telling me I have to collaborate. And it never dawned on me to do a lecture, an exercise, an icebreaker around collaboration, and just at least to begin to set those stages. Where I'm going with this is from the high level down to the trenches. Maybe we need to give ourselves the means to succeed. And that may be by doing exercise, sharing tools, know-how to support ourselves as we're trying to achieve those goals. I hope I'm making it makes sense in my head. I'm sorry if I'm not clear in articulating it.
But there's a ranking, Jordan. Of course, we're not going to collaborate. We've got to win the ranking. Oh, totally hear you.
I want to chime in and support Jordan's point here, and from a slight adaptation and advocate for greater transparency and communication within the organization
about
frankly about everything.
About everything.
that would support, I believe.
Okay, we've just taken a turn here.
Well, you're asking what are things that we can do to be effective, basically.
Yeah.
More broadly, there's a cultural aspect. We don't seem to do well across faculty. I've been on both sides of this, at trying to get my Molson students out the door and into the hall building is a challenge. Trying to get the hall building students into the Molson building is no easier. It's very difficult. We lack the structures to meaningfully collaborate across boundaries, across faculties as faculty members.
Yeah.
Our programs aren't well structured to do that. Our policies just on, you talk about procurement, and I've forgotten who talked about changing procurement, but it doesn't have to be sustainability procurement. It's just try to buy a computer in this university. So increasing transparency, communication, thinking about the processes on our everyday work, regardless of sustainability, will, I believe, help create a culture of greater communication and collaboration, which will facilitate sustainability.
So, question for you on the looping back just a little bit about the students crossing faculties, frameworks and structures for that. There's a phrase that the folks who invented the 17 groups format have about the kinds of outcomes that they'd like to see from these conversations. And that is, the conversation participants come up with ideas for things that are big enough to matter but small enough to get done. So I'm going to pose you the question: what's big enough to matter and small enough to get done with respect to that kind of cross faculty collaboration, communication, and facilitation? What's one thing that we could do? You may not have an answer on the top of your head, but I'm going to pose the question and see if you have a ready answer either now or later at some point about, like, you can't always dismantle the full wall at one time, but what is one thing that you can do that helps to change the system? I don't know if these are your comments in the chat bar around that question. New programs, if not departments geared around SDGs, those kind of cross.
I mean, the communications problem is probably paramount. These are the way the SDGs reframe what research should be as fundamentally interdisciplinary problems. I mean, at least I'll give them, I hate them, but I give them enough credit to say that they're pointing towards a reorientation of what universities are supposed to be doing from the ground up. So, the big money universities are seeing these things. As I watch what's going on in Edinburgh, they can talk about new programs. Like, fuck that. We can have a program per SDG, and then we'll hire people that will focus on this, right? And then we don't have a problem of like trying to get our engineers to talk to our social scientists, to talk to our whatevers, because we're going to put them all in. I mean, they could do that in the UK because everything is like fuzzy soft money anyway. But I mean, that's one of the solutions, right? Because the university, the entire sort of modus operandi of the thing is not built for doing what is being asked of us.
Yeah.
So I mean, I agree with the communication thing, but boy, oh boy, that's like almost a harder problem than tackling an SDG historically.
Arian, you have your hand up. Go ahead.
I mean, the communication problem is nothing new, right? Institutions like Concordia are and have been siloed for a long time. We try, it seems like every year or even every 6 months, to dismantle those silos and start talking to each other across faculty, but it never really seems to work right. And I want to propose a really simplistic, maybe even a little childish approach, is in spaces like the four space, which are and have been really cross-disciplinary in the past. And now that we're hopefully getting to a point where we can meet and mingle in person again to a relatively safe degree, is to have like science fair style meet and greets. Like, let's just fill the floor space with all kinds of cool projects from our 4 faculties. And just have these and have them on a regular sort of rolling basis, and they change presenters, the booths change up, and we really get immersed, and we're there because we are a place, Concordia is a place of community. Whether or not we're in silos or not, we are a really community-based place. And so if we have these opportunities to actually be with each other in that way, and if all else fails, we do it in this way. We do it somehow online and do a science fair style meet and greet, but we share with each other in that way, because we can say that we can build somewhere within the Concordia website, a place where we can exchange and whatever. But if we don't keep it up to date, and if nobody knows that it's even there, then it's useless, right? So if we can actually have these human exchanges, then we're probably all thirsting for it after the 2+ years that we've had, to just be with each other and share all of the cool and amazing things that we're doing. So that would be my suggestion.
Cool, thanks. Jordan.
Just picking up on this connecting, and I think tackling any one of those SDGs is not going to be done, or it's not going to happen through one faculty, one discipline, one domain. We need collaboration. We need, conversations. Why not open up the possibility for, through co-teaching, let's create a pool of profs who are willing to commit minimum of a year and tango across silo, across disciplinary divide, create a new course that tackles one of those SDGs, and I know KUFA is going to shit a brick, and there's going to be opposition, but maybe it's on a voluntary basis, and we have enough. We have an even, or we work some system out that it's going to even out in terms of workload and all these other processes that we have. And then you task these professors to, okay, develop something cool and see if it gets traction. And if it gets traction, then maybe we can see about where that takes us curriculum-wise and research-wise. And that would be something I would think, low-hanging, as you were saying, but potentially impactful.
Yeah, there was a course format called Wicked Problem Courses that ran as a pilot about 3 years ago or so, and pandemic flushed it, and it hasn't been resurrected yet. It's come up in a couple of other conversations. There are a few questions about at what level is it most appropriate? Does it involve grad and undergrad, or just like where is it situated in the landscape at Concordia? But it is a potential. It may be a potential, and it may even be the kind of thing that we could attract some donor to support for.
Well, if you're looking for guinea pigs, count me in. I'll tango with anybody who wants. Bart. I mean, I love your sense of humor, by the way. So I'll you reach out for volunteers who may be the first wave and therefore may be committed to really, getting down a topic or something that has some teeth. And I'm up for it.
Cool.
Can I just come in on, and there is an initiative, and you'll have seen, around sustainability in curriculum. So that might be an existing avenue to pursue this and really highlighting the value of the co-teaching within this space. And there's a sustainability, there's now a particular position within the CTL sustainability curriculum developer. So,
I didn't know that.
Yeah, I mean, I hear you on the silos, but there are some things happening. There's also a proposal to allow for the development to facilitate graduate program development at to have more of the kind of indie style interdisciplinary programs happening. So there's an awareness of the need for us to do things differently, things underway.
That's good to hear.
Maybe not communicated, not always as transparent as it should be, but happening.
Raymond, you've had your hand up for a little bit. Why don't you jump in?
So I love this idea that Jordan's brought up. I just learned yesterday that the staff unions can take secondments as it's part of their agreements. You can leave and go to another part of the university for a year and then come back as a way of engaging in professional development. You know, I can tell you 3-4 departments that I would pack up and go to next month just for that kind of experience. Exactly what Jordan's saying. There's 2 things here which I may be, so forgive me if I'm a bit scattered. One is Jordan himself. So Jordan, forgive me, I'm gonna put a spotlight on you for a moment. Jordan is an award-winning teacher. He is well known for this. And he is just one example of the type of excellence we have that we don't adequately, frankly, and I can pick a couple of others, but Jordan's in the room. I think we should be putting Jordan on a lecture tour of the university to help the rest of us out on these topics. Now, to Monica's point, this is something I've seen as well, that we're getting new opportunities to engage in cross-pollination, but they do still seem to be rather stilted and bureaucratic and heavily paper-based, paperwork in advance. And the interesting stuff, the stuff that Arian's talking about, the stuff that Monica and I worked on with the Millis, is for large parts that stuff that's done on the side. This is we're volunteering our time because it's interesting. Once it gets into the bureaucracy, it scares me, frankly. Now, going back to Millis, we've been having this conversation for what, 10 years? Maybe longer, but we still can't get it done. Maybe there's something that I haven't learned the secret handshake yet, but I struggle with that because there's simply things that we need to move faster on. So.
We need to get things done office, huh? The bureaucracy of the get things done bureaucracy. Bart, why don't you go ahead? And I'd like to circle back also to the Living Lab structure, which we've moved away.
Yeah, I mean, my comments are connected to that too.
Okay.
Amy. So I mean, I totally support what everybody said so far, but historically, my big worry is that Concordia is famous for lots of cool, innovative initiatives that are one shot.
Yeah.
And we have the Wicked Problems thing. Before that, there was something else. I mean, I've applied for it all. It's great and it's very exciting. It's always hardly any money, but buys my time anyway. And then it's over and we move on. So this is not what the SDGs are about. It would be pretty sad if we ended up at that kind of level of initiative production. This, to me, again, I'm looking around since I started to care, I guess, about the SDGs. I've been looking around. We can't do what the big universities are doing, but we sure can do something better than an initiative in this and that. So, even if we want to develop curriculum proposals to fund new initiatives and joint teaching, we want a separate umbrella to house and develop that. Not enough that one prof's going to do it, out on overload, a couple times. That sucks. It's got to be part of a program that is being tested, like an idea for a program that might lead to something, and it will need administration, it will need staff, it will need research funding. So all the things that bigger universities would not blink at because they have their donors and everything else to be able to jumpstart something big. But at the scale that we're going to do it. And one of the things is I am okay, having been here for like 25 years dealing with initiative after initiative, I'm okay with being excluded if the people who are included are supported enough to make something happen. We don't have to share it so that we all get like 5K. I'm happy to not have my 5K and have somebody else have lots more to be able to make something happen. And around the SDGs, serious enough and seems to be enough traction. That's the other part I like. I do like that other universities of our tier are in a shared kind of space around this. So that gives us a reason to collaborate and not necessarily compete. because we are trading students back and forth like you wouldn't believe. It also gives us a reason to steal students that would otherwise go to McGill or U of T, which I'm very happy to do every time we can do it. I'm looking for those moves, those plays, not another like, give me something little and let's do a cool course. I think that's always going to happen. But until those courses get on the books as regular features in departments and programs, I don't see how we're solving anything significant there.
Yeah.
So the Living Labs, by the way, is just one brilliant model. It's very close in spirit to how we always think about operating at Milieu, but I like the framework as a generalizable framework because it can operate as a kind of experiential learning curricular platform. So you can tie courses to it. You can have an entire program built around it, as well as research, as well as high visibility community engagement. So as a kind of structure, it's able to bridge between the university and everything else very nicely. And historically, I used to be involved in the science shop movement way back when I was younger, as a PhD student. Same kind of model of sort of active, engaged projects being the learning that's going on here, and keeping that as open and accessible as possible as a kind of academic platform. So because it's coming up, and I know it's looking really interesting, and it's tied already very much to the SDG targets, that might be something to look at bolstering, really underwriting and getting a stable staff there, because that's the other trick. You can rely on us faculty members to pop up every now and then, but then we're supposed to have sabbaticals and do other things and this and that. So it's the core staff that's going to be important here, and nobody ever wants to pay for that.
Mm-hmm.
Jason, just a second, just to flag the Sustainable Transitions Teams Research Initiative. I know it may seem like it's one of these things that have popped up, but we did manage to secure 100,000 to support 5 teams, and we will, it looks like, hopefully have that money again next year and the year after. But the idea there is to really try and do something different, to build teams, to work closely with them in terms of the cohort development, working with a very different model. Instead of having research advisors giving information and commenting on, to be part of the team and to have training, to have peer learning, to have the community engagement piece, to really try and work very much as a partnership model. And these there are 5 teams that have been identified in the competition. They'll each have 20,000, and I'm really working over the summer closely with them and into the fall. I'm going to showcase, bring them into the fourth space, have conversations, hopefully shifting the model around this type of research. And yeah, so suggestions around that, but I see it as an initiative that really ties closely to the Living Labs and the connection of the students as researchers being a critical piece of that.
Cool. Well, I'm just noting that it's about 5 to 4. Just want to ask any other comments in particular about the question of circling back to those consumption and production related targets and objectives. Anything that anybody else wants to add in terms of what Concordia might focus on and orient its efforts around consumption and production? Big goals for ourselves. Yeah, Ariane?
I think we're probably farther along than we think. There's been so much work done, definitely in the last 5 years, and more likely in the last 10 years, to start to shift the way that we consume and produce at Concordia. Obviously, there's always room for improvement. And like I was saying earlier, can we integrate it into research by looking at alternatives means to electrify our future fleets, because we are heading in that direction. We are aiming to electrify our different vehicles on campus, including the shuttle bus. But how are we not buying into the lithium craze? Can we actually research our own batteries at the institution, and again sort of close our own loop on that kind of consumption? That's just one small example.
Yeah, and that's one domain that there's some focused interest in about how, so not at all discounting the dedication and creativity and commitment of students doing living lab initiatives, but how do we also find ways for researchers to engage in a substantive way around that kind of activity? So just noting that's on the radar definitely, and hear that. Anders, you want to jump in?
Yeah, thanks. This is also maybe seem like a bit of a random example, but I don't remember we have discussed it during these 2 hours. From what I know, especially before the pandemic, the biggest impact of a researcher is flying. Or it's like a major size of your total environmental impact is from flying to conferences, workshops, and so on. And I know there has been a lot of good initiatives recently on trying to change the culture in academia towards less flying. And I just really think that's something that, if it's not already happening, it's something that Concordia should be looking into. I know it does relate to production and consumption, although it's a bit more abstract. It doesn't happen within the territory of the university, but it's the academics traveling all over the world to talk about climate change, sustainability. And I think especially, we're having this meeting on Zoom now, so we're already showing that we're capable of discussing without necessarily meeting in the same physical space. And I think it's very important that we take those learnings from the pandemic on how to continue collaborating without being in the same space, and apply them, and not just go back to 3-4 conferences a year on another continent.
Yeah, Bart, now we just need to run our Zoom servers off of solar panels, and then we'll be all set.
We'll do like the Flintstones. We'll pedal to
There we go.
Just picking up on that, I do want to underscore something. Last year at the Center for Sensory Studies, which I'm the co-director, we threw our biannual Uncommon Senses conference entirely online, had double the participants we had when it was in person. And I want to underscore the incredible work that Hospitality Concordia, they really rose to the challenge. They made platform available to us. They helped in so many ways. So we do have those units that are I would say the unspoken heroes, or the quiet voices. I want to applaud what they did for us, but I also want to underscore that there are partners in some of these things that you're just suggesting.
Yeah. That's super great. Any other last comments, observations, things you want to get on the table, points for further conversations? Feel free, if you have ideas you want to elaborate on that came up today, to shoot me or shoot us emails afterwards. Bart, I'm particularly interested to hear, like, what's the right size thing that Concordia can undertake that gives real integrated structural substance to this engagement with the SDGs. Others, Anders, I may have to follow up with you in thinking about how, at an institutional level around our commitments, how do we create this really positive cycle between what we set as objectives, how we assess, and making sure that there's positive feedback loops and examples from the corporate world that might be useful for us. Others view, just super appreciate all the engagement today, the great ideas, the great energy, the great commitment that we're seeing around these issues. Even walking our children outside while participating in the meeting earlier. Appreciate that, Faysal. And
thanks. I just have one quick comment before everybody goes. Those targets that we did set, that we haven't publicized very much yet from the sustainability plan. They're very related to this, the 90% diversion and the 50% reduction of our total material consumption. those are big challenges that were not easy to even get people to commit to leadership, even though the timeline seems very long. I wanted to have it a little shorter, but they're ambitious. The point is, the way we framed them and got them to agree to them was to say, these are ambitious targets that we don't exactly know how we're going to reach. Then nobody quite is getting to these points either that we can look at as replicable models. So we need the academic input, whether it's research or course-based kind of living lab work, whatever it is, to innovate to reach these goals. And so we have sticking points that we're going to hopefully highlight to the community and then try to frame as challenges. And so just want to put that out there that, you know, we're really, really excited to work with people like yourselves to think about these problems and how we can surpass them.
Amazing.
Yeah. Thanks, Faysal. And actually the research and sustainability stream needs to be establishing its KPIs and its clear targets. That's another avenue for continuing this conversation, which we will on Monday afternoon. Bart will be there, but send ideas. Seriously, that's another avenue to continue this conversation.
Right. So a big thanks for everybody for spending a couple hours on a Friday afternoon with us. After we close down the session, you're going to get a brief, just a 3-question little survey that you can use to give us a little feedback about the format and about the conversation today. We'd appreciate if you take just 2 more minutes to do that. Again, just really thank everyone for participating and really feeding into this institutional deliberation about how do we not just give lip service to and not just tag things as being SDG relevant, but to really live those values and those commitments as an organization and really help to advance this work in all the different ways that the SDGs compel us to. So have a great weekend all, and we'll see you all soon, or some of you soon. Take care.
Take care.
Thank you, Jason. Bye, everyone.
Bye. Thanks, everyone.
Take care.